Well, hello everyone, this is Pastor Chris and welcome to a little OCF Church update. This week I wanted to take a little bit of time to address the wonderful topic of social media. Many of us just recoil when we think of social media. Others of us love social media, and I have kind of a mixed relationship with it. I started Facebook years ago because my parents lived on the East Coast out in South Carolina in the boonies, and it was one way for them and some of my friends on the East Coast that I could just engage them and keep up with them in their lives and show them what's going on in mine, particularly when I had kiddos. Got to show them off a little bit on social media. But social media has only exploded since then. You may or may not know that our church did not really have a social media policy until last year, and we decided that it was such an important tool to be used to engage particularly our students, but really our whole OCF family. We realized that tool was so important that we need to make sure we had some guidelines for usage because social media can be divisive. And during this quarantine with all the questions and competing data and competing messages about the origins of this pandemic and whether or not we should use masks and whether or not we should reopen our church and all of those range of topics, along with race and culture right now, and so many questions and so many just difficult topics to process and think through. There's an opportunity for us to engage one another on social media, but there's also a real strong temptation and tendency for division to be created there, and we've witnessed some of that. A lot of times, what you see is someone making a post on their page, and we can talk about whether or not that's a wise thing to really put yourself out there on your page. That's up for debate. But then you have someone else, certainly well-intentioned, I'm sure, that comes along and decides to correct that person's thinking. And you end up with a back and forth debate between church members in front of the world to see. And so there's people that don't know one or other of the parties, and people that may gather from reading that they're part of the church, and the condescension and the kind of unhealthy exchanges back and forth, that gives them a window into our church and into the church as a whole. So in much the same reason we launched our social media guideline, really that's just for OCF staff and leaders and volunteers to make sure that we have a guideline, a standard to kind of follow. We also challenged our church to use that as their guide as well, and I just want to reiterate that. And as I was reading through some of the Proverbs to prepare for this sermon series that we have going on right now, I stumbled across Proverbs 18. I just want to read a couple of verses, verse 18:2 and verses 6 and 7, and just get a picture of what God might have to say about disputes and sharing our opinions and things of that sort. Let me just read Proverbs 18:2. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Verses 6 and 7. A fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites a beating. A fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are a snare to his soul. There really is a huge temptation when we're thinking of and processing complex issues like race and culture, like whether or not there's a thing such as systemic racism, whether or not we should reopen our church, whether or not it's wise to wear a mask. We need to make sure that we are being humble and wise and kind and graceful, and that if we do decide to engage on social media, we carry those principles in. We want to be known as a people who really love well and are willing to think hard about subjects and shine the light and love and grace of the Lord in the midst of that stuff. Certainly, those things are not in opposition to truth, but even when we share that truth, it needs to be shared in love and in humility, because a lot of these issues, they really are difficult, and I think a lot of us could stand to do a lot more research before coming to strong positions on some of them. So I just want to challenge you, as you use social media, use that as a representative of the Lord, knowing that there's a watching world that looks at you as a follower of Jesus, as a Christian, or as a religious person, a spiritual person, whatever they might think. You're a representative of your family, you're a representative of our church, and you're a representative of Jesus. And so just take that as a high call, and represent him well. Use a lot of grace. Be kind. If you get into kind of a back and forth, and maybe invite that person to a offline one-to-one conversation. One of the biggest challenges in this season with our quarantine is we don't have the natural grace of being in the same room with one another. And there's just a grace to being in the same place and seeing one another face to face, and just being in the same room. There's a beauty to that, and it also kind of checks us a little bit. I think a lot of times things are shared from behind a keyboard that maybe we wouldn't share in person. So use wisdom, use grace, pray hard, invite God into those exchanges, and just know that there is a watching world out there. Have a wonderful week. We love you guys, and maybe this. If you feel the need to challenge someone in social media, I challenge you to take 10-15 minutes and read a chapter or two of Proverbs and pray before doing so. And we just want to make sure that we are coming together as a body. We are rallying around the gospel, and we're not, as a church, dividing over issues. So that's a big challenge for us going forward during this quarantine, but we look forward to when we can get together again, and we look forward to addressing these issues and wrestling with them. And as Proverbs says, becoming iron that sharpens iron. We want to sharpen one another so we can become more like Jesus and represent him well. But we do love you guys. Have a great week.